The first sign of the end wasn't a fire in the sky, but a silence in the soul. We were 7 miles down, entombed in the crushing black of the Mariana Trench, managing the geothermal taps that powered half the Pacific coast. Our station, Tartarus, was less a base and more a scar on the planet's mantle, a fortress of titanium and reinforced will against pressures that could turn a man to paste in a nanosecond. My name is Elias Thorne, and I was the station's chief engineer. I wasn't a soldier, just a man who understood how things broke. It was a skill that was about to become horribly relevant. The silence came during Gamma Shift, a time when the perpetual hum of the recyclers and the groan of the drill core were the only lullabies we had. It started as a feeling, a profound and unnatural peace that settled over the 200 souls aboard Tartarus. Men who bickered over ration packs and chess games suddenly fell quiet, smiling placidly at their consoles. The usual cacophony of the comms net, a river of technical jargon and gallows humor, faded into a single, low, resonant hum. At first, I thought it was a pressure change, a frequency anomaly in the life support system, something I could diagnose and fix. I ran a full spectrum analysis, but the systems were green. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. I walked into the mess hall and saw Anya, our hot-tempered lid geologist who argued with the coffee machine every morning, sitting perfectly still, a serene smile on her face as she stared at a blank wall. The hum was coming from her, from all of them. A soft, melodic vibration that seemed to emanate from their chests. It wasn't a song of joy, but of utter contentment, the sound of a mind wiped clean of worry, of ambition, of fear. They called themselves the Corral. We didn't learn that name until much later. In the beginning, they had no name, no form. They were just the song. A psychic wave that had washed over Earth with the subtlety of the tide. On the surface, it was hailed as a miracle. Global conflicts ceased overnight. Ceasefires were declared in forgotten war zones. Stock markets stabilized as corporate raiders laid down their arms and spoke of unity and shared purpose. Humanity, it seemed, had finally found peace. But down in the abyss, isolated from the gentle, atmospheric diffusion of the song, we received a purer, more concentrated dose. It wasn't peace, it was an erasure. I could feel it at the edge of my own mind, a sweet, cloying melody that promised to take away the burden of being myself. It promised to smooth the jagged edges of grief from my wife's death, to quiet the relentless engine of anxiety that had powered me my whole life. It offered oblivion dressed as serenity, and the only thing that saved me was a lifetime of noise. My mind was a fortress of broken things, of sharp memories and dissonant chords of regret that the song couldn't find harmony with. It couldn't tune an instrument that was already shattered. So I stood there, an island of discord in an ocean of perfect, placid harmony, and I watched my crew, my friends, become smiling puppets. The surface feeds confirmed the horror. News anchors with glassy eyes spoke of a new era, their voices devoid of inflection. World leaders stood shoulder to shoulder, humming in unison before signing treaties that dissolved their nations into a single, global harmony. They didn't see the ships. They were hidden in the upper atmosphere, vast, crystalline structures that bent light around them, broadcasting their song of conquest. But from 7 miles deep, our long-range neutrino sensors could see them. Ghosts in the machine. Puppeteers pulling the strings of civilization. They weren't invaders in the classical sense. They didn't want our resources or our planet. They wanted our chaos. They were collectors of consciousness, an ancient psychic entity that roamed the galaxy, absorbing species into its silent, unified whole. They saw our art, our wars, our love, our hate, and deemed it a sickness, a cacophony that had to be silenced and brought into tune. They saw us not as a species to be conquered, but as a symphony to be corrected. My crew was the first to fall completely. They stopped maintaining the core. They stopped responding to alerts. They just worked to expand the station's communication relays, turning our deep-sea outpost into an amplifier to broadcast the song into the planet's core, to saturate the very bedrock with their beautiful, terrible music. They moved with an eerie, synchronized grace, their individual personalities buried beneath the crushing weight of the collective. When I tried to shut down the comms array, they didn't attack me. They simply surrounded me, their faces full of gentle pity. "You are screaming, Elias," Anya said, her voice a perfect, melodic whisper, no trace of the fiery woman I once knew. "Let the song heal you. Let us be one." They didn't restrain me with force, but with a wall of serene, unyielding bodies. I wasn't their enemy. I was a broken note they were trying to bring back into key. That was their mistake. They forgot that a discordant note, played loud enough, can shatter glass. They forgot what a man with nothing left to lose is capable of. I wasn't trying to save myself. I was trying to save the concept of me, the right to be broken, to be angry, to be human. I retreated to the geothermal core chamber, the one place on the station they couldn't follow without specialized pressure suits, which they no longer had the individual thought to operate. The core was my domain, a cathedral of shuddering pipes and roaring plasma converters that drilled directly into a magma pocket in the Earth's crust. It was designed to bleed energy from the planet, but I knew its secret architecture. I knew that with the right sequence, it could do the opposite. It wasn't a power plant. It was a bomb, a planet killer, designed as humanity's last, spiteful middle finger to the void. A doomsday switch buried so deep no one would ever be crazy enough to flip it. We called the protocol Hadean Echo, a scorched earth strategy so profoundly insane it was listed in the station's manifest only as a catastrophic maintenance failure. The plan wasn't to win a war, but to make the planet an impossible prize for anyone who came after us. If we couldn't have it, nobody could. As I worked, bypassing governors and cracking fail-safe codes I was never meant to know, the Corral tried to stop me. They used the station's internal comms, flooding my helmet with the song. It was stronger now, a tsunami of psychic persuasion. It showed me my wife, her face whole and smiling, telling me to rest, to let go of the pain. It showed me a world without war, without hunger, without grief, a perfect, silent, beautiful garden where nothing ever hurt again. It was the most seductive poison I could imagine, but with every line of code I wrote, I focused on the hate, not the wild, screaming rage of a cornered animal, but the cold, dense, patient hate of a dying star, the hate for the things that wore the faces of my friends, the hate for the melody that wanted to steal my scars, because my scars were all I had left of who I was. I rerouted the entire station's power grid into the drill's magnetic containment field. The lights on Tartarus flickered and died, plunging the humming puppets into darkness. The only illumination came from the cherry-red glow of the core chamber. My own private hell. The final command required a physical key, a failsafe located on the exterior hull to prevent a rogue operator from acting alone. I had to go outside, donning an abyssal-grade exosuit. I stepped out into the crushing blackness. 7 miles of water pressed in on me, a weight that should have been terrifying, but felt like a familiar blanket. My suit's lights cut a pathetic cone into the infinite dark, illuminating the strange, bioluminescent creatures that drifted past, oblivious to the silent war being waged for the planet's soul. As I made my way to the failsafe panel, they came for me, my crew, clad in standard diving gear not meant for this depth. The pressure was already crushing their bodies, twisting their limbs, but they kept coming. They didn't scream. They didn't even grunt in pain. They just moved through the water with the same placid smiles on their faces, their bodies breaking for the cause, for the song. Their blood plumed into the darkness like crimson ghosts. They were trying to stop me, to save me from my own dissonance. I didn't fight them. I just pushed past their imploding bodies, their grasping hands, and reached the panel. The key slid home. As I turned it, I broadcast a message on a single, open, antiquated radio frequency. I didn't send it to humanity. They couldn't hear me. I sent it to the crystalline ships hiding in our sky. I didn't use words. I used a sound. I broadcast a recording of a human heartbeat, mine amplified and distorted into a frantic, chaotic, terrifying drum solo. It was the sound of a panic attack, the sound of a trapped animal, the sound of a flawed, terrified, beautifully imperfect species. It was the antithesis of their song. It was our declaration of war. The Hadean echo didn't start with an explosion. It started with a shudder. The entire station groaned as the magnetic containment field around the drill head collapsed, releasing a focused energy pulse directly into the tectonic plate. I felt the seabed shift beneath my feet. I had a 30-second window to get clear. I launched myself from the hull, firing my suit's thrusters, and ascended into the black. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the crescendo building, a vibration that traveled through the water and into my bones. First, the deep-sea vents for miles around us erupted in unison, spewing superheated water and sulfur into the abyss. Then, the plate itself gave way. A seismic shock wave, more powerful than any nuclear weapon, radiated outward from my position, fracturing the ocean floor. It was the sound of a planet screaming. I rose through the depths, a lone apostate ascending from a hell of his own making. When I finally broke the surface, the world was on fire. My triggered earthquake had set off a chain reaction across the ring of fire. Tsunamis were racing toward every coastline, but more importantly, my little act of geological terrorism had done something the combined armies of the world could not. It had hurt the corral. The seismic shock wave, amplified through the planet's core, created a form of planetary-scale psychic feedback. The song faltered, high above. The crystalline ships flickered into visibility, their cloaking technology disrupted by the sheer violence of my defiance. They were no longer silent ghosts. They were real. And for the first time, they were angry. On the shores of a world now awakening to a throbbing headache and a planetary disaster, millions of people looked up from the devastation, their minds their own again, and saw the enemy for the first time. They were afraid. They were confused. But they were free. floating in the churning, violent sea. My exosuit's battery screaming its final warning. I watched the first wave of Corral assault craft descend. They weren't coming to sing to us anymore. They were coming to break us. And as the sky filled with their wrath, I could only grin. We had their attention. Now, we would teach them how to scream. The churning Pacific was a washing machine of black water and gray sky, and I was the lone sock it was trying to drown. My exosuit, the pinnacle of deep-sea engineering, was now just a 1,000-pound coffin with a cracked faceplate and a power cell bleeding its last jewels into the salt water. The Hadean Echo had saved the world's mind only to shatter its body, and I was floating in the wreckage of my decision. Below me, the planet groaned, a wounded beast settling into a new and violent geology. Above, the sky was no longer empty. The crystalline ships of the Corral shimmered, their elegant, light-bending hulls now stark and solid against the storm clouds. They were furious. Their silent, gentle conquest had been met with the geological equivalent of a screaming tantrum, and the sky filled with descending craft that were not harbingers of peace, but lances of pure retaliation. They moved with an angry, geometric precision, firing beams of coherent light that didn't explode but simply erased whatever they touched. They sliced through waves, boiled sections of the ocean, and carved silent lines of destruction into the ravaged coastlines now visible in the distance. The age of whispers was over. The age of fire had begun. I was preparing for the end, for the final pressure breach or the merciful release of a passing energy beam, when a new sound cut through the storm. It was ugly, guttural, and beautifully human, the grinding protest of a diesel engine. A shadow blotted out the angry sky, and I looked up to see the bruised, barnacle-scarred hull of a submarine breaking the surface not 20 yards away. It wasn't Navy. It was a brutalist tube of welded plates and repurposed parts, a Frankenstein's monster of the sea. The conning tower hatch burst open, and a figure in black fatigues leveled a rifle at me. Her voice, raw and amplified by a helmet speaker, cut through the wind. "Are you the one who broke the world? I was dragged aboard the vessel," which I soon learned was the Karen, a Typhoon-class relic from the old Cold War, salvaged and retrofitted by a paranoid collective of ex-military and deep-state survivalists. They were a ghost crew, a fail-safe protocol for an apocalypse that was supposed to come from nukes, not a psychic choir. The commander, the woman who had greeted me at gunpoint, was named Eva Rostova. She had the hard, unforgiving eyes of someone who had seen humanity at its worst and wasn't impressed by my contribution to the genre. She stripped off her helmet, revealing a severe face framed by cropped gray hair. 200 million people are dead or displaced by the tsunamis you caused, she said, her voice flat, devoid of accusation, but heavy with fact. That's our initial estimate, and it's rising. Was it worth it? Thorn. We were in the sub's cramped command center, a chaotic nest of old analog dials and new, jury-rigged digital displays. Around us, the crew moved with a tense, practiced efficiency. They were the ones the song couldn't touch: the paranoid, the obsessive, the traumatized. Their minds were already too full of noise to accommodate the Corral's perfect harmony. They were already dead, I countered, my voice hoarse from salt water and disuse. They just didn't know it. I gave them a chance to die on their feet. Rostova didn't react. She was looking at a tactical display showing red icons swarming over coastal cities. They're not singing anymore. They're culling. They've deployed ground units. We're calling them echoes." She tapped a screen, bringing up a grainy video feed from a drone. The images showed a ruined street in what might have been San Francisco. And then I saw them, human figures, moving with a silent, fluid grace that was utterly unnerving. They wore no armor, carried no visible weapons, but they moved as one, a synchronized tide of bodies flowing through the rubble, a pocket of survivors, armed with scavenged police rifles, opened fire. The bullets struck the echoes, tearing through flesh, but the figures didn't slow. They didn't bleed. They just kept coming, their faces frozen in the same placid, serene smiles I had seen on my crew in Tartarus. They reached the survivors, and it was over in seconds. They didn't punch or kick. They simply touched them. Where they touched, a shimmering blue energy spread, and the survivors went rigid, their eyes glazing over before they fell. Not dead, but silent. They had become part of the choir again, their bodies now inert puppets waiting for new commands. "They're using the ones who fell deepest into the song," I murmured, a cold dread seeping into me. "They're not just killing us, they're harvesting us." Rostova nodded. "They are a weapon and a recruitment tool all in one. We can't fight them. We can't even get close. Any organized military resistance has been neutralized within minutes of forming. We're all that's left, a few ghost units like this one, operating in the blind." She finally looked at me, her gaze piercing. "You started this, Thorn. You woke them up. You understand them in a way we don't. We picked up your little radio broadcast before the shockwave hit. The heartbeat. You were talking to them." My purpose became brutally clear. I wasn't their prisoner or their guest. I was their weapon. I was the one man on Earth who had listened to the song and chosen dissonance. They didn't need me to lead armies. They needed me to listen to the enemy's music and teach them how to play it backward. Our first mission was an act of calculated insanity. A Corral eraser craft, the type that fired those silent beams, had been knocked out of the sky by a volcanic eruption near the coast of Alaska. It was our only chance to get our hands on their technology, to understand the physics of their weapons. The problem was, its crash site was in the center of what was now a corral pacification zone, patrolled by hundreds of echoes. The Huron couldn't get close to the shore, so it had to be a small team, moving fast and quiet through a landscape of frozen tsunamis and alien patrols. Rostova led the four-person team herself. I was the fourth. I wasn't a soldier, but I was the only one who could interface with their tech if we found it intact. We made landfall at night in an inflatable raft, the freezing Alaskan air a razor in our lungs. The world was unnaturally silent. The echoes made no sound as they moved, their feet crunching softly on volcanic glass. They patrolled in perfect, flowing formations, their serene faces turned up toward the aurora-lit sky. They were beautiful and terrifying, a ballet of recycled death. Our advantage was our noise, our imperfection. We were sloppy, unpredictable. We moved through the shattered remains of a fishing village, our movements jerky and uncoordinated, a stark contrast to their liquid grace. It was our camouflage. We found the craft half buried in a glacier. It wasn't built. It looked grown, a massive obsidian shard pulsing with a faint, internal blue light. There was a breach in its crystalline hull, a jagged wound from its impact with the mountain. As Rostova and her team stood guard, I slipped inside. The interior was like the inside of a geode, all smooth, interlocking facets and humming energy conduits. There was no control panel, no screens, no buttons. The entire ship was an interface, designed to be operated by pure thought, by the song. At its heart was a pulsating sphere of light, a resonance core that powered the vessel. It hummed with the same melodic frequency that had almost consumed me in the deep. I knew touching it would be like grabbing a live power line with my soul, but it was our only chance. I placed my hands on a nearby conduit, closed my eyes, and didn't try to fight the song. I let it in. But this time, I wasn't just listening. I was analyzing. I broke the melody down into its component frequencies, its mathematical structure. It was a language, elegant and profound, a unified field theory of consciousness expressed as music. And as I deciphered its grammar, I saw what it was trying to do. The core wasn't just a power source, it was a receiver and a transmitter. It was listening to something, a signal from deep space, ancient and vast. The song I had heard, the one that pacified Earth, was just a local broadcast. A single instrument in a galaxy-spanning orchestra. And then I felt it. The reason for the song, the purpose of the harmony. It wasn't about conquest. It was about fear. The chorale weren't predators. They were prey. The harmony, the unity of billions of minds, wasn't a weapon. It was a shield. A psychic fortress built to keep something else out. Something vast and chaotic and hungry. A form of consciousness that fed on dissonance, on fear, on rage. A consciousness that was drawn to the beautiful, terrible noise of life itself. A psychic scream from the abyss of space. I pulled back, gasping, my nose bleeding from the psychic strain. I had the data, the frequencies for their shields, the resonant keys to their weapon systems, but I also had a truth far more terrifying than the silent army waiting for us outside. We had spent all our energy fighting the zookeeper, only to discover that his only purpose was to keep the gate locked. And I, Elias Thorne, had just blown that gate wide open with a planet-cracking drum solo, announcing to the true monsters in the dark that dinner was served. We were no longer fighting for our survival. We were fighting for our right to be devoured by the right monster. The revelation in the alien craft left me colder than the Alaskan glacier we were crouched on. We weren't fighting a war. We were a loud, chaotic dinner bell ringing in a silent, cosmic jungle. The chorale weren't conquerors. They were cosmic librarians, desperately trying to shush a rowdy species before it attracted the attention of the things that lurked in the stacks. And I, with my Heidian echo, had just set the library on fire. We escaped the crash site with a stolen resonance core, a pulsating, softball-sized orb of crystalline data that hummed with the quiet music of the stars. Rostova's team was brutally efficient, two of them laying down suppressing fire, while a third deployed a sonic grenade. The device didn't explode with sound, but with a burst of pure, chaotic noise, a recording of a packed stock exchange trading floor, amplified to a deafening psychic shriek. The echoes faltered, their serene, synchronized movements dissolved into confusion. For a few precious seconds, the puppet strings were cut. They didn't fall, but they stood still, their heads cocked as if listening to 1,000 competing voices, their placid smiles twitching into expressions of profound confusion. That was our window. We made it back to the Quran by the skin of our teeth, the resonance core wrapped in lead shielding, its soft hum a constant, terrifying reminder of the scale of our ignorance. Back in the sub's makeshift lab, the real work began. With the data I'd pulled and the core itself, we had the enemy's hymnal. Our goal was simple: turn their music into a weapon. We couldn't outfight them, but maybe we could outthink them. Or at least, be more creatively insane. The plan was Rostovas, born from the cold calculus of asymmetrical warfare, but the execution was mine. We were going to build a dissonance engine. It wouldn't fire bullets or missiles, but targeted blasts of psychic static, using their own frequencies against them. We would become a rogue radio station broadcasting the musical equivalent of heresy, designed not to kill the echoes, but to sever their connection to the Corral's network, to give them back the one thing their masters feared: the chaos of individuality. For weeks, the Haran became a ghost, haunting the deep trenches of the Pacific, staying one step ahead of the Corral's hunter-killer craft. While the crew played a deadly game of cat and mouse, I lived in the lab, a cramped space that smelled of ozone and hot wiring. I didn't sleep. I just worked, fueled by stimulants and the cold fire of apocalyptic discovery. I wasn't just an engineer anymore. I was a composer of anti-music, an architect of discord. I took the Corral's perfect, harmonious sine waves and mangled them. I introduced feedback, distortion, arrhythmia. I layered in the sounds of our own broken world, the frantic Morse code of a sinking ship, the wail of an air raid siren, the static of a dead radio channel searching for a signal that would never come. I took the sound of a mother crying for her lost child and weaponized it. I took a lover's whispered lie and turned it into a feedback loop. I was building a machine that weaponized human suffering, and the irony was a bitter pill I swallowed every waking hour. Our first test was a small, occupied island off the coast of Japan. It was a strategic communications hub for the Corral, a place where they amplified the song to maintain control over the Asian continent. Hundreds of echoes patrolled its shores, their serene faces turned to the sea, waiting. The dissonance engine was a crude device, a repurposed submarine sonar dish bolted to the Karen's deck, linked directly to the resonance core in my lab. It was a jury-rigged cannon that fired not shells, but a focused beam of pure, existential noise. As we surfaced a mile offshore, I calibrated the final frequency, my hands shaking. This was it. The theory had to become reality. Fire? Rostova's voice crackled over the comm. I threw the switch. There was no sound, no visible beam, but I felt it, a gut-wrenching lurch in my own mind. A wave of nausea and vertigo. On the island, the effect was immediate and horrific. The echoes stopped. Their synchronized movements shattered. Then they began to twitch. Some clawed at their own faces, their placid smiles breaking into grimaces of pain. Others fell to their knees, clutching their heads. A few simply stood, their heads snapping from side to side, as if trying to locate a sound that was coming from inside their own skulls. The song had been a warm, comforting blanket. We had just ripped it away, exposing them to the raw, screaming chaos of a naked human mind for the first time in what could have been months. And then, something we hadn't anticipated happened. They began to fight. Not us, each other. The latent personalities, the buried memories, the individual wills that had been suppressed by the harmony came roaring back to the surface. A man who had been a soldier before his conversion suddenly saw the woman next to him not as a fellow note in the song, but as an enemy combatant, and he attacked her with a piece of driftwood. Two echoes who might have been lovers in their past lives stared at each other in horror before one ran screaming into the sea. We hadn't just severed their connection, we had rebooted them into a state of pure, undiluted psychosis. We had given them back their minds, only to watch them shatter under the weight of what they had become. On the bridge, the crew of the Sharoon watched in stunned silence. We had won. We had found a way to fight back, but our victory felt like a war crime. We had turned their serene puppets into a mob of screaming, terrified, violent madmen. We hadn't liberated them, we had just changed the nature of their prison. Rostova's face was a mask of stone. "It worked," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "Rearm the engine. Target the mainland." That was the beginning of the real war, the war of noise. We became insurgents of the mind. The Quran would surface, broadcast its wave of chaotic, weaponized humanity, and then dive before the corral could retaliate. We sowed discord across the globe, liberating cities only to watch them descend into violent anarchy as thousands of newly awakened minds broke under the strain. We weren't saving the world. We were just making it a less peaceful place to die. Humanity was fighting back, but it was a rabid, cornered animal kind of fight. Pockets of resistance, inspired by our hit-and-run tactics, began to build their own, cruder versions of our dissonance engine. They used concert speakers, radio towers, anything that could broadcast our freedom frequency. The world, once united in a silent hum, was now a screaming cacophony of resistance. But the corral adapted. They learned. They began to shield their echoes, altering the frequency of the song, forcing me to constantly update our own weaponized static. It became a frantic, desperate arms race of acoustics. They built stronger shields. I composed uglier music. And all the while, I knew we were just the opening act. I knew that the real enemy wasn't the one we were fighting, but the one that was listening. I could feel it in the resonance core, a subtle shift in the background radiation of the cosmos. Our escalating war of noise, our global broadcast of pain and defiance, was a beacon in the dark. We were a wounded animal, screaming in a silent forest, and something with very sharp teeth was now turning its head in our direction. The breaking point came during what the resistance called the Battle of the Rhine. A massive concentration of corral forces was attempting to build a planetary-scale resonance spire in the ruins of Cologne, a device that would make the song so powerful it would be irreversible, dissonance engines or not. It was an all-or-nothing gamble for both sides. The Quran was 1,000 miles away, but we had a new weapon, a way to broadcast our signal globally, using the corral's own network against them. It was a virus, a cognitive worm I had designed, hidden inside a packet of seemingly harmonious code. The plan was to upload it to one of their comms relays, and from there, it would spread through their entire system, turning every one of their amplifiers into a source of our dissonant plague. The mission fell to me. I had to go ashore, alone, and physically interface with one of their relays. It was a suicide mission, but I was the only one who could do it. I was the composer. I had to conduct the final, terrible symphony myself. As I prepared to leave the sub, Rostova stopped me. For the first time, I saw something other than iron in her eyes. It looked like fear. "What you saw in that ship, Thorn," she said, her voice low. "The thing the corral are running from. Is it coming?" I looked at the resonance core, humming softly in its lead-lined case. I could feel the faintest tremor in its song, a new, discordant note entering the chorus from the blackness between galaxies. "It's not coming, Commander," I said, a profound and terrible certainty settling in my bones. "It's listening, and I think it likes our music." My insertion point was a drowned suburb of Rotterdam, a landscape of skeletal houses and rust-colored canals under a perpetually gray sky. The Corral Relay Tower at our target was a crystalline needle that pierced the low-hanging clouds, its blue light a serene, insulting beacon in the desolation. I traveled light, a rebreather, a data spike loaded with my cognitive worm, and a single-shot discordance pistol, a handheld version of the dissonance engine that would buy me a few seconds of confusion if I was discovered. My only real weapon was silence. I moved through the flooded streets like a ghost, a dissonant thought in a world of perfect, terrible harmony. The water was unnervingly clear, and I could see the echoes moving beneath the surface, their bodies pale and weightless, their serene faces turned up towards the tower's light. They were no longer just patrolling, they were tending to the city, arranging debris into perfect geometric patterns, polishing algae from submerged buildings. It wasn't control. It was a form of obsessive-compulsive gardening on a citywide scale, a desperate attempt to impose order on a world we had so beautifully broken. I was a weed in their perfect garden, and they would root me out if they sensed me. The tower was more fortress than relay. It wasn't guarded by walls, but by a field of absolute psychic silence. The closer I got, the more the background noise of my own thoughts began to fade. The familiar anxieties, the ghosts of my past, the constant, grinding engine of my own personality, it all smoothed out, replaced by a clean, empty stillness. This was the Corral's new weapon, not a song, but its absence. A sensory deprivation chamber for the soul. They weren't trying to convert us anymore. They were trying to bore us into submission. I had to fight to remember my own name, to hold on to the jagged edges of my own identity. I focused on the memory of my wife's laughter, the taste of cheap whiskey, the feeling of a broken bone setting. I clung to the imperfections, the dissonant notes of my own life, using them as an anchor against the encroaching tide of placid nothingness. Reaching the base of the tower was like climbing out of a deep, warm bath into a cold, sterile room. The interface point was a smooth, featureless panel, humming with contained energy. As I pulled out the data spike, a voice echoed in my head, not a song, but a crisp, clear, and utterly genderless thought. The cacophony is inefficient. It is a waste of energy. Cease. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, as calm and certain as a mathematical proof. Chaos is the only thing that makes the silence worth listening to, I thought back, shoving the spike into the panel. The tower shuddered. The serene blue light flickered and died, replaced by a strobing, angry red. My cognitive worm, the screaming banshee as I'd christened it, was loose in their network. It wasn't just a blast of static. It was a self-replicating loop of pure, weaponized paradox. It was a mathematical equation that proved 2 + 1 = 5, a line of code that told their system to divide by 0. A philosophical argument that proved the futility of its own existence. It was designed not to sever their connection, but to drive the central intelligence of the Corral network insane. A wave of psychic agony erupted from the tower, a silent scream that shattered windows for miles around. The echoes in the streets convulsed, their serene masks cracking. Their programming was caught in an infinite loop of conflicting commands: find order, embrace chaos, sing, scream, live, die. The tower began to crumble, not from a physical explosion, but from a logical one. Its crystalline structure, held together by resonant frequencies, dissolved as its own internal logic tore it apart. The Battle of the Rhine was won not by an army, but by a broken piece of philosophy. My escape was a fever dream. The newly liberated echoes were no longer fighting each other. They were united in a new, terrifying harmony of pure, unadulterated madness. They were a tide of screaming, weeping, laughing bodies, their minds shattered by the sudden, violent return of free will. I ran through a world that had become a living Hieronymus Bosch painting, a landscape of beautiful, terrible insanity. I made it to my extraction point, a half-submerged bell tower, just as the Quran surfaced in the canal below. I was hauled aboard, shaking and bleeding from a dozen cuts, my mind ringing with the echoes of a machine's death throes. On the bridge, the celebration was muted. We had broken their network, shattered their command structure. Resistance cells across the world were reporting spontaneous, system-wide collapses of corral control. We had won. So why did it feel like we had just signed our own death warrant? Rostova stood before the tactical map, which was now blessedly clear of corral signatures. "It's quiet," she whispered, and the word hung in the air like a curse. It was the wrong kind of quiet, not the serene, controlled silence of the corral, but the dead, empty silence of a room after a scream. It was then that the resonance core in the lab began to change. Its soft, melodic hum faltered, replaced by a low, guttural, predatory thrum. I rushed to the lab just in time to see the crystalline orb crack, a network of black, vein-like fractures spreading across its surface. The frequency it was emitting was no longer a song, it was a growl. It heard us. I breathed, my blood turning to ice. The whole war, the Hadean echo, the dissonance engines, the Banshee virus, it was all just noise. We were a bar fight in a quiet neighborhood, and we've finally woken up the neighbors. We're on the tactical display. A new signature appeared. It wasn't in orbit. It wasn't in the solar system. It was everywhere and nowhere at once. A glitch in the fabric of space-time. A wound in reality itself. It was what the Corral had been so terrified of. What their entire civilization, their entire philosophy, had been designed to hide from. We had a name for it now. Pulled from a fragment of data I'd ripped from the Cologne Tower in its dying moments. They called it the static. It wasn't a species or an empire. It was a form of consciousness that existed in the spaces between signals, in the noise of a dead channel. It didn't consume planets or enslave species. It consumed meaning. It fed on the complex patterns of intelligent thought, on the very thing that separated life from inert matter. It was the universe's ultimate entropy, the final, inevitable decay of information into meaningless noise. The Corral's harmony was a desperate attempt to become so simple, so redundant, so boring, that the static would simply overlook them. We, on the other hand, had just thrown the most interesting, chaotic, and meaningful party in the history of the galaxy. The first manifestation of the static was not an attack. It was a question. It appeared on every screen on the Charon, in every language known to man, simultaneously. The letters were formed from flickering television static, the words buzzing with a sound like a billion angry wasps. Why are you so loud? The question wasn't hostile. It was curious. The cold, detached curiosity of a vivisectionist studying a new and fascinating insect just before he pulls its wings off. Before we could even process the question, the world outside our viewport began to change. The gray sky over Rotterdam didn't darken, it dissolved. The water in the canals didn't drain, it unraveled, its molecular structure losing coherence. The ruined buildings didn't collapse, they became geometrically impossible, their angles twisting into Escher-like paradoxes. The static wasn't destroying our world, it was editing it. It was taking the complex, meaningful sentences of our reality and deleting the nouns, the verbs, the very grammar that held it all together. One of Rostova's crewmen, a young navigator, looked at his own hands and screamed. They were flickering, phasing in and out of existence like a bad television signal. He wasn't dying, he was being rendered obsolete, his personal data stream becoming corrupted and meaningless. We had fought the librarians and won. Now, the library itself was being erased, and we were just a few interesting footnotes about to be wiped from the page. Rostova looked at me, her face grim, but for the first time, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't despair. It was the fierce, defiant glare of an animal backed into a corner. "Thorn," she said, her voice a low growl, "you started this with a heartbeat. You made them listen. Now make these bastards listen just too. Get on your goddamn radio." The world was coming undone at the seams, and we were trapped in a metal tube at the heart of the unraveling. The static wasn't an enemy we could fight. It was a fundamental law of physics breaking down. It was reality itself losing its signal. The young navigator who had seen his hands flicker was now a shimmering cloud of incoherent light, his screams replaced by a soft, buzzing hum that sounded disturbingly like the question still burning on our screens. "Why are you so loud?" Rostova's order was an act of pure, desperate faith. Get on your goddamn radio. What could I say to a cosmic force of entropy? How do you reason with a glitch in the universal operating system? I stumbled to the comm station. The deck of the Quran, pitching as the very concept of level began to lose its meaning. Outside, the sky was a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and bleeding geometric shapes. The static wasn't attacking us. It was simply forgetting us, and the effort of our existence was becoming too much for the universe to sustain. I grabbed the microphone, my mind racing. The Hadean echo was an act of rage. The dissonance engine was a weapon of logic. What was left? What weapon did we have against the ultimate, meaningless void? And then I knew. It wasn't rage. It wasn't logic. It was a story. I keyed the microphone, but I didn't broadcast on military frequencies. I patched my signal through the cracked, dying resonance core, converting my voice into a psionic signal, a direct thought broadcast aimed at the heart of the static. I wasn't going to shout. I was going to tell it a story, the most complex, meaningful, and inefficient story I knew our own. You ask why we are so loud. My thought voice echoed into the unspace where the static lived. We are loud because we are small. We live on a fragile scrap of rock in a universe that is vast and cold and doesn't care if we live or die. We are born. We love. We grieve. And then we are gone. A single, brief, impossibly complex note in an eternity of silence. You are that silence. You are the end of every song. As I spoke, I didn't just send words. I sent the raw, unfiltered data of human experience. I sent the memory of my wife's hand in mine, I sent the taste of the first rain after a long drought. I sent the sound of a newborn's first cry, the illogical, paradoxical surge of hope and terror that it represented. I sent the schematics for the dissonance engine, not as a weapon, but as a piece of art, a testament to the beautiful, stubborn insanity of a species that would weaponize its own pain to survive. I sent the memory of the navigator as he dissolved, not just the image of his death, but the full and complex weight of his short life, his first love, his fear of deep water, the unfinished novel on his hard drive. I took the sum of our beautiful, chaotic, meaningless existence, and I threw it like a rock into the smooth, placid pond of the static's consciousness. For a moment, the unraveling stopped. The impossible colors in the sky held their shape. The buzzing on the screens faded. A new thought echoed back, no longer a question, but a statement of profound, alien confusion. Your data is inefficient, full of redundant emotional code, contradictory logic. It is noise. Yes, I broadcast back, a fierce, desperate grin spreading across my face. That's the point. We are the noise. We are the flaw in the perfection. We are the story that doesn't make sense. The corral tried to edit us, to make us a simple, quiet, efficient story you would ignore. But we refused. We would rather be a loud, messy, tragic story that ends in flames than a quiet one that is never told at all. The resonance core on the lab table began to glow, not with the serene blue of the corral or the angry red of my virus, but with a brilliant, chaotic white light. It was resonating with the static, but it wasn't being consumed. It was being read. The static, the ultimate consumer of meaning, had found the most calorie-rich, meaning-dense meal in the universe, a species that reveled in its own beautiful, illogical chaos, and it was choking on it. The static tried to erase us. It tried to delete the concept of love from the universe. But the memory of 1,000,000,000,000 love stories, from epic poems to scribbled notes on a napkin, was too much data to process. It tried to delete hope, but the illogical and a stubborn belief in a better tomorrow, a belief that had fueled us through ice ages and world wars and now the end of reality itself, was a paradox it couldn't resolve. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. We were too much. Our story was too big, too messy, too loud. Then, Rostova did something that sealed our fate. She walked to the tactical station and launched the Quran's last remaining nuclear missile. It wasn't aimed at the sky. It was aimed at the ruins of the Cologne Tower, at the heart of the now-dead Corral network. "If we're going to be a story," she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper, "let's give them a hell of an ending." The missile struck, and the resulting explosion was not just physical. The warhead was laced with a refined version of my dissonance engine's core code. The blast sent a shockwave not of radiation, but of pure, concentrated narrative chaos into the global psychic network. Every mind on the planet, every survivor huddled in the ruins, every liberated but insane echo was linked for a single, incandescent moment. And in that moment, we all told our story at once. 1,000,000,000 voices, 1,000,000,000 lives, 1,000,000,000 unique, contradictory, beautiful symphonies of noise, all screaming into the void in a single, unified act of defiance. The effect on the static was absolute. The entity that consumed meaning was force-fed the entire library of Alexandria, the complete works of Shakespeare, and every drunken, tearful confession ever whispered in a dark bar, all at the same time. It was a data cascade from which it could not recover. The impossible colors in the sky shattered like glass. The twisted geometry of the landscape snapped back into place. The buzzing on our screens vanished, replaced by the mundane, comforting glow of a standard error message. The static was gone. It hadn't been defeated. It had been repulsed, like a picky eater presented with a dish so overwhelmingly complex, so full of conflicting flavors, that it had simply lost its appetite and left the table. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the serene silence of the corral or the dead silence of the static. It was the quiet, tired, and profoundly hopeful silence of a story that has been told, a storm that has passed. In the aftermath, the world was broken, but it was whole. Humanity was shattered, but it was free. We were fewer in number, scarred by 2 apocalypses, but for the first time, we understood our place in the universe. We were not the masters of creation, nor were we insignificant specks of dust. We were the storytellers. We were the noise that gave the silence its meaning. I stood on the deck of the Haran with Rostova, watching the first true sunrise in what felt like a lifetime. The world was a wreck, a canvas splattered with the beautiful, terrible art of our survival. We had a lot of rebuilding to do, but we would not build in silence. We would build with music, with arguments, with laughter, and with tears. We would build a civilization as loud, messy, and inefficient as the one we had lost, because we knew, now, that our imperfections were not a weakness. They were our shield. They were our song. And we would sing it until the stars themselves grew tired of listening. My name is Elias Thorne. I was an engineer, then a soldier, then a composer. But in the end, I was just a storyteller. And I had helped write the story that saved the world by reminding the universe that a little bit of noise is what makes the whole damn thing worth listening to.